This is the Editor's Half Hour. Step into the life of an editor for 30 minutes as we discuss the craft of editing, industry trends, and editorial resources. Your host is co-founder and CEO of Peak Publishing Inc., Nadia Jaja Pupa. She is experienced in all facets of the publishing industry, from editing to design, and works with corporate clients and self-published authors. Nadia and her guests are about to share powerful insights and stories on what it takes to be an editor. And this is your host, Nadia Jaja Pupa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Editor's Half Hour. Today, we're going to talk about true crime. This is a topic that is seriously interesting to a lot of people. It is so interesting that there's even a podcast category dedicated to true crime, at least on Apple. I know that for sure. So we're going to talk about why is it such an interesting topic. We're going to talk about how the process works in developing stories that are related or are focused on serious things that happen, which is true crime. And so today we have Andréa Topper. Andréa and I met so randomly in a networking event, and it was so much fun. And when she told me what she was working on, we were comparing notes on our projects, and I was working on something at the time that was very intense. It was somebody sharing details about their personal struggles and abuse, and it's a very heavy topic. And Andréa said, "Well, I'm doing something similar." And then I just remember my face getting closer and closer to the screen, and I was just so interested to hear what she was working on. And so that's a little bit of background on how we met. And Andréa she's an editor, she's a writer, she's working on something right now. So Andréa, tell us all about you and how you got to this place, because you have a little bit of that journalistic background as well, and I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Thank you for the great introduction, Nadia. I appreciate that. So yes, I started my career as a journalist. That's what I did, and that's what I love doing. I still feel like that's part of who I am as a human, that curiosity that I have. And so, now I got into corporate communications, but I still apply a lot of, that journalism style to the content and the communications that I create today. And I actually, over time, have come to see that as very valuable. At first, I was like, oh, I don't really fit in here, but now I see it as something that can be very valuable. So in terms of how I got to this particular place, in terms of trying to embark on the kind of massive endeavor of writing a book about true crime and someone specifically, a few years ago, I was working for CrossFit headquarters in the media department, and they received a request to teach a level 1 seminar. This is to basically create coaches. You go in, you teach a class, and they take a test, and you watch them coach other people. And I know these happen around the world,
Okay.
multiple times over the course of a weekend. But this is the first time that CrossFit had received a request from a prison. And it was
Wow.
specifically a local police officer in the state of Colorado who was working with some of these prisoners, who he himself had a CrossFit gym at the time. And he was basically making this pitch: can you guys come and teach this class? And so it was actually a quick yes from CrossFit at the time. I mean, CrossFit has been known to be, untraditional and iconoclastic. So I was like, yeah, sure, we'll do it. And so it was through that, me going and kind of very much in still a journalistic style, I'm going to go cover this, right?
Right.
And write about it. And that was a very interesting experience, because when I first went, my mind kind of wasn't in the place of like, oh, we're going to prison and not jail.
Right.
And, I just sort of made some assumptions. I'm like, oh, well, I literally didn't even think about what their crimes were, but I was unconcerned. I remember that, being unconcerned.
Yeah.
And they were a super attentive group of students, just eating up the information, finishing the instructor's words, because they had studied so much that they knew the material really well.
Wow.
And I remember that night going back to my hotel room and starting to Google their names.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my, These guys are in
Wow.
here for like, uh, murder, assault, sexual assault. It was a little like the reason it wasn't just like the kind of the shock or the revelation of learning their crimes. What it was is that I watched that first day of the class, and I found them so relatable because
Wow.
of their CrossFit experience and my CrossFit
Yeah.
experience,
Yeah.
that when I got back to the hotel and started looking this up, I was actually having a personal struggle of like, "Wait a second. Had I known this before I went in, I think I would have had, frankly, a different attitude
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
about it." So
Yeah.
it was a weird moment for me, I think, we're realizing, like, that I sort of liked them, that I thought they were cool, and then I went back and I was like, "Oh my god, like, this is serious." Like, their crimes are not, anything petty, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
So how did you show up the next day? You had to go back another day, the next
Yes.
day?
Yes,
So
I
what
did
was
have to
that
go the
like?
next day, yeah.
You went in probably, like, scared? I don't know. What did you feel?
It's
How
so
did
weird
you
because I
handle that?
wasn't scared, and I can't
Okay.
even explain to you why. Maybe it
Okay.
was because I saw first, like, how compelled they were by the CrossFit philosophy to the point where I saw how they interacted with each other first, and it was
Okay.
very respectful.
Okay.
It wasn't until later that I came to learn, like, hey, this community, essentially, that they have created around CrossFit, which happened very naturally, is something that is unusual in prisons. I don't have any experience in prisons. So when I talked to one of the administrators there, he said, what is unique, what is surprising, and what is refreshing about what's happening with this CrossFit program here is that typically in prisons, you see people form, um, I'll go as mild as saying, like, their own group of people to as extreme as their own gang, and it completely breaks down on racial lines.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
he's like, with what they're doing right here with CrossFit, like, I saw a mix of people in terms of skin
That's
color
great. Yeah.
and ethnicity, and I didn't think anything about it when I saw it because that's what I'm used to
Right.
in CrossFit.
Right.
But when he told me, "No, no, this is weird. This is not the way it
That's not
happens,"
typical. Yeah.
I was like, "Wow, okay, so now they've created a situation where they've created a community across racial lines, across ethnic lines, right? And not only are they treating each other better, but frankly, it makes it easier for the prison staff as well to interact with them, right? Their
Yeah.
attitudes start to change, right? It's the typical things that you might see with like, oh, we're doing exercise and all of the um kind of chemicals that produces when you exercise, those feel good chemicals.
Right.
And um yeah, that was fascinating because, typically we had thought of the CrossFit experience being like, well, you really have to go to a gym and you really have to watch all these videos from all of the people involved in creating CrossFit to really understand. But all they
Right.
had was this manual that someone else had to like access via computer and print out for them. And they
Okay.
created this community, which to me really spoke to the strength of the methodology of CrossFit, that they could
Yeah.
just read something and then they would organically, all on their own, without any outside influence, create a community in the same way that you would see at a gym. In fact, the trainers who were there to
Wow.
teach the course said, I can't, like, this is quintessential CrossFit. And they had no really outside influence except from this one, police officer in a gym, and he wasn't there all the time. He visited like maybe a couple
Wow.
times a month.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, you could see how it changed sort of the social dynamics, it changed people's attitudes. And that's why in Colorado, it has kind of proliferated. That CrossFit program is now in many more prisons.
That's
And even
amazing.
the Colorado Department of Corrections is involved in trying to see, okay, how can we spread this throughout all of our facilities because we're seeing how much it benefits everyone.
Yeah, that's a very powerful change to witness, especially in that setting. So there you are, there in a prison. You're just this beautiful girl walking into this room and it's all men, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what was that like? And then how did that lead you to you singled out somebody specific that you thought
Yeah.
would make an interesting story to cover.
Right.
Um, so it led to something. So how did that explain a little bit about that? And then we can fast forward a little bit to where you are now on your project too.
Right. Yeah. So, the walking into the room part didn't feel totally, I didn't feel unsafe, or like I wasn't very focused on, I'm the only female in the room. I mean,
Right.
I coached Olympic weightlifting for many years. I coach
Wow.
karate.
That's
And so I'm
cool.
kind of used to being the only female in the room a lot of times.
Okay.
So
That's
that
cool.
wasn't
That's
a new
cool.
feeling. Having said that, though, when I was moving between buildings, so I should back up and say that this group whom was taking this level 1 seminar, they were in this incentive unit. So they kind of were people that the only way you get there is like good behavior, basically.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
So that's to begin with. Now, when I was
Okay.
moving between this huge campus, right? This
Right.
this this prison.
Yeah.
Um, and when I was moving between some of the buildings, I did encounter a group from not from the incentive unit, but a different unit, and
Okay.
they were probably what you would think of as a stereotype of male prisoners reacting to a female. Um,
Oh,
Not all of
God.
it is probably appropriate to
Appropriate.
repeat. I did write about it, but,
Okay.
it didn't shock me, because I expected I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know what is gonna happen, but something weird is definitely gonna happen, right?
Right.
And
And
so
you're
I was
tough and you've got, you're not like coming in like, oh no. Like
right.
you said, you had that expectation, a little bit of it.
Yes, I
So,
did, and so, when one of them yelled something,
oh God.
inappropriate solicitation, I'll call it, I just didn't even turn around. I just kept walking. The
Good for
administrator
you.
I was with was like, "I'm so sorry," and I was like, "Don't worry about it."
Good
'Cause
for
I
you.
kinda get it, and it wasn't
Yeah.
about me. They don't know me, it
Right.
wasn't personal, right? So
Right.
you
Of
kind of
course.
expect that, but,
Right.
so anyway, back to this particular group from this incentive unit. Yeah, so I started talking to more of them because I was fascinated by the fact that I felt so comfortable around them, but I knew that some of them were there for some absolutely hideous crimes.
Horrible things. Yeah.
And I was kind of reflecting on myself. I'm like, why is it that why am I okay with this? It's weird. If you had explained this situation to me before I went in, I'd be like, "Oh, no, no, no."
Right. Not doing
I would have
that.
had an attitude about like an
Right.
attitude problem about it,
Oh,
you know?
of course.
And so I talked to one of the guys that was there, and it was like there was 2 or 3 other guys around him, and I did not know that I was kind of committing a faux pas, but
Oh,
I said,
okay.
So what are you here for?" Well, they don't talk about that with each other, because if there's certain
Oh,
things, right? Like
yeah.
in this case, the guy who I was talking to, like, he was
Yeah.
in there for murder,
Okay.
and I looked him up later. He wasn't one of the people I looked up that first night.
Oh my God.
He was there for fatally stabbing his wife and toddler.
Oh my God.
Right, and so
Oh,
that'll get some definitely unwanted attention from fellow prisoners, is killing a child,
right.
right?
Right. That's
And
horrible.
he whispered it when he said murder, and it didn't compute, right? Like, why is
Right.
he
Right.
whispering? Like, doesn't everybody know why you're in here? But they
Right.
don't talk
But
about
you
that.
but you wouldn't know that because 'cause you're not in,
No,
so you're just
no.
innocent, kinda innocently asking, and
Yes,
then, just, "Hey, what are you in for?" Oh my
right.
God.
Yeah,
Oh,
and then the fact that he chose to answer. And
okay.
also, like, I followed up because they can, they get phone calls, so I followed up with some of them, was able to schedule phone calls.
That's cool.
Um, he made a conscious decision to tell me, even though he knew what the repercussions could be. And, I mean, frankly, he doesn't really know what the repercussions could be. Is someone gonna lash out and be like, "You killed a kid," and
Right.
all of a sudden he gets
And
stabbed
fight.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a heinous crime. There's no 2 ways about that, and he would agree. Um,
Yeah.
But in
But
that process, so I wrote this article, a couple of articles. One was just like
Okay.
about the program and what happened. Another one was a little bit of a self-reflection.
Okay.
And then I just kind of kept talking to him because he was trying to kind of proliferate this program with a bunch of other guys because they saw how much it made things better. It made them better. It made other people around them better. The prison liked it because prisoners were easier to interact with, talk to. And then that whole idea of, they called themselves the whole time Redemption Road CrossFit. And they eventually
Okay.
became an officially recognized CrossFit gym.
Wow.
So that idea of redemption, right?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating one. And I don't have I don't have any answers for the audience, but I don't, the other day I was having a conversation with someone who ministers at prisons. It's just something
Okay.
that's completely separate from this story. And
Right.
I told her about this person I know that I talked to, this man I talked to in prison,
Right.
told her what he had done. And she said, "Has he forgiven himself?"
Mm,
And I said, I don't know the answer to that question, actually.
that's a really good
And the next
question.
time I talked to him, I told him, hey, I have this, I was talking to this person at work,
Yeah.
ministers at prison. She asked me if you'd forgiven yourself. Have you? And he was
Whoa.
silent for a little bit. And he was like, and then he kind of laughed, just like a real kind of mild chuckle. And he was like, I'm working on it. And,
Yeah.
frankly, I don't know,
Right.
I don't know how you do this. I don't
Right.
know, some people would look at it and say redemption is not possible,
Yeah.
right? Now
Yeah.
you can't come back
Right.
from something like that.
Right. Right.
Um, but if I just look at like the big picture here, right? The point of all of this, like why am I even doing it?
Right.
Is taking a look at the US prison system and how it really largely fails.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We do not rehabilitate folks. There are
Right.
certainly some spots around that are improving. I mean, Colorado Department of Corrections and their prison system is one example with this CrossFit program. But I mean, for the most part, we just kind of put people in cages and say, like, for lack of a better phrase, like you're an animal, so we're going to treat you like one
Right.
until you die. Right.
Right. That's the
But
punishment, you know?
totally. And I understand that too. Like, right. The punitive aspect. I understand that.
Right.
But what if you could just make the situation better for everybody? Is
Right.
there harm in that, right? And then this
Right.
argument, by the way, like who knows what kind of comments you'll get on this because this argument never ends. Because some
Right.
people were like, "Why are you doing this? Why are you going in there and
Right.
making them
Right.
physically stronger?" It's like, hey, they were going to do this with or without us.
Right.
But the effect it has on their psyche and making those around them better, providing a community, even if they do stay there forever and die in prison,
Right.
it's decidedly less miserable if you have a community, if you have a group of people that's supportive, if you
Right.
can interact with others with respect.
Right.
It's a big deal.
And the fact
Um,
that you went in not knowing anything, that's kind of what opened your eyes to this as well. If you had
yeah,
gone in the very, very beginning and had known all the stories, this guy murdered somebody, this guy, you would have walked in completely with a completely different mindset. So the fact that you went in completely, ignorant of the backgrounds of these men, it kind of gave you like you said, how do you even describe that weird moment that you experienced when you looked at them as human beings and not as criminals?
right?
That's really what it was in your mind. I mean, I'm speaking for you, but it sounds like that's what it was.
Yeah,
And now you're approaching a really, really interesting project. So you are writing a whole story. This is real, I mean, true crime now. And why I think it is interesting though, and in you, I want you to speak a little bit more about what is pushing you and your purpose behind writing this. And you talked about the prison system as a whole, but the reason that this topic specifically is interesting to so many people, and this is my opinion, I do feel that people are very much compelled and intrigued by these grotesque things. Why do people like horror films? Why do people, why, or something that might be considered quote unquote scary? Um, it's mildly entertaining, and that's so disturbing to say because true crime is true crime. This is
Right. Yeah.
actual crimes.
Yeah.
This isn't fiction. And so now I'm going to pivot a little to discuss your ethics behind this and your responsibility as the editor, as almost a journalist, as a writer. How deep do you go and how dark? This is dark, dark. I mean, this is real stuff that happened.
Yeah.
You have that responsibility now that you're carrying almost a burden of telling a story, but how graphic do you get?
Right.
This is a very graphic thing that happened, a very horrific thing. So I want to know about your expertise in this world of writing true crime and like I said, ethics and responsibilities behind that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I definitely at some points kind of reminds me of my early days as a reporter because as most reporters, like I started covering cops, right? I was on the cops
Right?
beat.
Yep.
And early on in my career, I had to cover a murder. Um,
Oh,
yeah. I'm just remembering that now as we're talking, but I was still in college. I was working at one of the newspapers in town, and there was a double murder in a quiet little town that was very
wow.
unusual. And the guys were on the run. There was like a manhunt, all this stuff. So it wasn't
That's
quite
crazy.
as it was terrible. It wasn't quite as maybe I'll say grotesque or heinous as like, it's different to shoot someone, right? Where you can have distance versus like having a knife in your hand and plunging it into someone's
That's
body.
something
It's
different.
different,
Yep.
right?
That's something else.
Um, so when I started talking to Damian is his name,
Mhm. Mhm.
and talking to him more frequently, the journalist in me was like, I have to know all the things
Right.
because you're used to being thorough. Did you miss anything? I need to know every detail. Maybe I need to recreate something, right, in the storytelling.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, let me see what information he is willing to share, like verbally. So we got into some conversations that, I remember one time I said, do you remember killing them? And he said, yes. And I said,
Okay.
no, I don't think you understood what I asked. Do you remember what it felt like for you to plunge the knife into your wife and into your son?
Oh,
And then as soon as I asked it, I was like, why did I ask that question? Do I even want to know the answer to
God.
this? Like, I
Oh
couldn't
my
even believe it
God.
came out of my mouth because I was like, the journalist in me was like, you need to ask this. And then the
Yeah.
human in me was like, why did you just say that?
Right. Right.
And there was silence
Okay.
for like a while. And to the point, like
Okay.
sometimes the prison phones don't work very well and they like disconnect. And I was like, I thought,
You thought you
oh, shit,
disconnected?
we got disconnected. And so I was about to say hello. And then he
Mm.
said, yes. It's like,
Oh my
okay.
God.
And so that was one moment where I was like, oh my, all right,
Yeah.
this is deep. And then I asked him, I told him, I was like, hey, I'm going to try to go about the process of getting your entire, like the whole police report.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, I do have some stuff that I got, from some of the prison officials or whatever. And so he sent me some basically, some part of the police reports where like the police walked in the house. What did they find?
Mhm.
All this kind of stuff. Right. And it's graphic, tells you how the bodies were found. And I had all of this inside of me, right, that I was like, I need to get it out. Like, I can't live it
Oh my
just in here,
God.
right? Because it was
Ugh.
so much.
Yeah.
And I would go to try to tell my husband, he's like, "Hey, easy. I can't also absorb this. This is too much for me." Right?
Right.
So, I was like, "All
So what
right."
did you do? How did you handle that? That's like that's too much. So you're, compelled to tell this story, right?
Yes.
You're given deep, dark information, graphic details from the police
Yeah.
report.
Yeah.
Heavy, heavy, heavy. That's all I can think of to say.
Yeah.
How do you or do you still struggle with this? I mean, I want your honest answer. Do you still struggle with the heaviness of this and how it affects it's almost emotional labor surrounding this
Yeah.
project. Does it affect your everyday life? How do you block it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, when my husband was like, I don't wanna hear about this," and I'm like,
Right.
I need to tell somebody." He goes, "Why don't you just write about it? That's what you like to do, right? You like to
Okay.
write." I was
Yeah.
like, "All right, I'll start a blog." and he stays far,
Good.
far away from the block. But I
Okay.
did start doing that, right? And
Yeah.
that selfishly helped me, but also helped to organize my thoughts around it too. Like, why am I doing this? What's the point? Again, like I went back to like, I do see this as a bright spot in a largely failing US prison system where
Yeah.
recidivism is high, right? People leave, they don't know another way. They leave with no money, no new skills,
Mm-mm.
probably no friends,
Probably
and
no
let's face
friends.
it, family that don't want to be associated. So what do? They fall back into similar patterns, and then back they go again into prison, right? And it's just a cycle that doesn't need to happen. So, yeah, I did that. It was the blog, right? That was part of it.
Yeah.
Now,
I
I should
love that.
add that the night of the crime, it began with him and his wife arguing.
Okay.
He has 2 other children, and they were in the house. When they started arguing, they ran next door. He had a daughter and another son, and they were still very young at the time, but they ran next door, and the neighbor was the one that called the police, and the police came over and found what they found, and the surviving children didn't see that, but that's another component, right?
Okay. This there's
Is this
that's another layer.
irresponsible to put
Right.
this out in the world when he has 2 children out there who could read this, and that might not have taken the effort to go and dig up, public police reports,
Right.
and I can understand that.
Right.
I'm not saying that I have a clear answer of like this, has to be out there in the world and I will do whatever it takes, but I do feel like it's important to put that idea out in the world that listen, we have this prison system that doesn't do its job in rehabilitating for sure. And it's always in my mind a good thing to make people better.
Right. Right.
And so if you're creating this situation where they can have community, they're interacting better with each other, they're respecting each other, they're respecting the prison staff, even
Right.
like I said, even if they live out their final days there, isn't that better for everybody?
Mhm. And now you're taking your place as that writer and editor to position a very heavy topic and a very giant thing that you've witnessed, and you feel very much compelled to share your opinions and your perspective on what you've observed and witnessed. So what would you we have to wrap this up, but I really think we're going to have to do a part 2 because we barely scratched the surface on
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah.
So hopefully we can do a part 2. No, we are going to do a part 2. But to wrap up this segment, okay, I just decided on the fly we're doing a part 2, but to wrap up this part 1, let's end this message on the editor's responsibility and your role as, I guess, you're a writer as well. You're writing this story. So if and you're not the only one doing something like this, there are
Right.
other editors,
Yeah,
maybe they're not talking about it, but what if there's an editor out there that is given this task or wants to take this on? What
right.
advice, do you have any advice for those people, those editors or writers? What would you share? What sort of advice, I guess, is really what I'm getting at, that you would
Yeah.
share about this?
Yeah, I think for me it was okay, I have this journalistic background where I wanted to get every single detail because I felt like I needed an entire picture and I had to have all the information. By the way, I didn't get all the police reports. After he sent me that detailed report, I was like, "Do I
Right,
really need the rest of this? What
right.
good is it gonna do me to know this information? What good is it gonna know the world? Is this really the point?" Right? As a journalist, you're wanting to get all the details. I
Of
need everything
course.
or else I can't have a complete picture. But
Right.
again, going back to why am I doing this in the first place? Does it serve anyone necessarily to add every excruciating and heinous and disturbing detail into
Right.
this?
Right.
Does it?
Eh,
And I have to
right.
ask myself that question like constantly. Like it's not like I've
Well,
resolved it because I go back and I'm like,
right.
oh, maybe I should do this and I'm like, "Oh my god, there's gonna be pictures in there. Is this what you wanna do to yourself?"
Right.
Right? And is this what I
This
wanna
is a
do? Like,
real
and then
issue.
do I share that, right? Like,
Right, right.
do I keep
This is
that
a
to
real
myself?
right, it's a real issue that you're struggling with as an editor, as a writer. There's no
Yeah.
class you could take. What are you gonna do?
Right.
Like take a class on
Yeah.
how to handle these major questions that you're asking, but I really respect and admire that you are constantly asking yourself those questions to help yourself determine what should go in and what shouldn't go in. And the fact that you're showing restraint, that's huge. I mean, that's very admirable that you know how to do that. And it's tough. You're showing us, you're telling us that that's not easy, but the fact that you're doing that is huge. So very cool. Editors out there listening to this who are intrigued by true crime, it is very intriguing. It's awkward to say that it's entertaining, but unfortunately it is. People get sucked into other podcasts that cover true crime stories for a reason. So like I said, other editors out there who are maybe working on some true crime, even editors working on fiction based off of true crime. These lessons still apply. These things that Andrea explained still apply. So I just want to say thank you, Andrea. I want to continue this conversation. This is not done, but to the listeners, I'm going to look at the show notes because I'm going to put in links to Andrea and her blog to get some more background on what she's experienced in her process, that her process is still going. So let's get this information out there, and we can use it as a learning process as well. So again, thank you, Andrea, for your time. I'm really excited to continue this conversation on what other things you've experienced in this writing process.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Editor's Half Hour. This podcast is your go-to resource for editorial trends, opening the discussion for new ideas through the real-life stories of editors. For more information about Nadia Jaja Pupa and her business, visit peakpublishing.com. That's PIQUE publishing.com. Be sure to follow Peak Publishing on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And remember to subscribe and follow the Editor's Half Hour wherever you get your podcasts.